Hello, BookTube. Sorry, the basement-style dodgy lighting, even dodgier than usable on this channel. The reason is because we are getting down towards the floor of our library tour. We're doing my Annex bookcase, which is a person-tall bookcase that is filled with books from 2019 that whose months have passed by, months of publication have passed by, but I don't quite want to get rid of them yet. These are the ones that I'm contemplating adding to my actual permanent library. Every year I go through this, and I try, ideally, the number of books that I should be doing like this gets smaller with every month. With every month, I should not only be moving over that month's books that I don't want to get rid of, but also culling this bookcase so that it stays just one bookcase for the course of the year, and then at the end of the year, cull that severely to maybe one shelf. I should be adding a shelf of books maximum to my permanent collection every year. That's a dream. That's not going to happen. But we are down to the second shelf from the bottom, and I'm starting to feel a little trepidation in this library tour because we're going around the room. We started in the eastern corner and with biography, and we are just going around this room. I know it's taking forever, but it's only one. It's only one room, and if we go around the room, the next bookcase after this is the one on the wall, which is my work bookcase. It's the top shelf is all August books organized by week of release. Then the next shelf down is all September, and then October, and then November, and so on and so forth. And I'm obviously not going to do that bookcase because I can't talk about those books. I either haven't read them or I have read them and I am going to review them. So either way, we have to skip that bookcase. And that means that the next bookcase after this one is The Darkest Depths of Mordor. Those of you who are new to the channel, in this room there is a built-in hutch in the wall with shelves on it. I think it was probably meant for, I don't know, crockery or something like that. And of course, being a book person, I have filled that space with books. And I don't mean in any orderly way. There are a million books in The Darkest Depths of Mordor, and I'm quite frankly afraid to go in there again. We tried it once before. A shelf cracked and collapsed. And that's the next one. So let's enjoy this while we can. So we're going to do this next. This is the, as Olive would say, the penultimate shelf on this Annex library tour. So we'll start with this one. And this is Luke Daly Groves. This is a book called Hitler's Death. It's the case against conspiracy. We need these books occasionally because there's no more pernicious thing than to say that the guy who orchestrated World War II and the Holocaust survived. And you wouldn't think it would be possible because, you know, there were half a dozen witnesses, half a dozen people there, only a few feet away, heard the gunshot, went in immediately and saw the bodies, and burned the bodies, stood around burning the bodies. You wouldn't think it would be any possibility for conspiracy theories, and yet there are. Oh boy, are there ever, including by some legitimate people, some people who otherwise have fine credentials. If you want to dive into this rabbit hole, I mean, it's interesting as long as you don't lose your bearings. Don't lose your bearings. That's actually the key to any rabbit hole. Feel free to dive into them all you want, but don't start believing them. Don't lose your bearings. But if you want to go into the most convincing rabbit hole, I mean, a lot of the people that push the theory that Adolf Hitler survived World War II are doing it for ideological reasons, and that is always a euphemism for anti-Semitic reasons. A lot of them are, but some of them aren't. The one that you should watch on YouTube, if I can remember, I'll leave a link to it down below. I'm not sure exactly what the title of it is, but if you YouTube search for Fourth Reich in the Sun, you will get an hour-long, or maybe more than that, presentation with one guy who is a legitimate journalist and believes that Hitler did not die in the bunker. And it'll lay out as much of a case as there is. The thing to remember when you're watching that or any other documentary is that shoddy forensic evidence is to be expected, first of all, in the chaos of the end of a war with a pillaging army coming from both ends towards the Chancellery in Berlin. But also, shoddy forensic evidence doesn't compensate for a half a dozen people who were actually present at the moment, so, and who had no reason. Well, anyway, I thought this was very good, very very incisive. So I kept it because I don't have another book on the subject other than Hugh Trevor Roper, which is has a few problems of its own. Okay, this next one is Digital Minimalism by super hottie Cal Newport, who advocates for exactly that. Would it be better if I hold him up here? He advocates for stripping away your digital activities, stripping them to almost nothing. Forever and ever, he went on the lecture circuit telling people, you don't need any social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Don't need any of them. Get rid of them all, and don't just stop posting on them. Take down, eradicate, and bleach wash your records. Just get rid of it all. You don't need it. You're not missing anything by having it. You don't even need to go online. You're not missing anything. One of his key points over the years has been that the proprietors of these places, who after all benefit from traffic, they don't need you to buy anything. They don't need you to actually respond to the ads they put on their sites. They benefit from your traffic. They benefit from your traffic and they harvest your data. Just showing up, in other words, is enough for them on your part. And his point has been for years that you don't need to do any of that. That these people, the people that create those online venues, intentionally make you feel like you'll be missing out on something if you're not part of it. That is a very intentional thing that they make you feel. Now, I myself think that it's just not arguable. It's just a flat fact that you will be missing out on something if you don't do that. Think back to your experience on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or all of them, if you're on all of them. Think about your experience, and you will easily remember many times when you experienced something really good through one of those venues that you wouldn't have experienced without it. I can come up with a million examples just this week. For me, yes, there's lots of toxic sludge, but there is lots of other stuff too, lots of great stuff. So I don't think this is a particularly compelling case. I reviewed this, and I like the book very much, but I think calling for digital minimalism in 2019 is, it's the last word that anybody would associate with Cal Newport, but I think it's a little silly. It's not the addresses that we want to make, all of us, to the omnipresence of social media in our lives is not unplug and walk away. It is obviously not that any more than in 1921 the proper response to the rise of the automobile would have been simply don't. Just walk the 40 miles to your job. Anyway, let's move on. All right, this next one is a beautiful finished copy of Cemetery Road by Greg Iles. I love this author. I just think he's fantastic. One of the only proponents of what I would consider to be modern Southern Gothic, who actually writes a book worth reading. I have never, of course, thought that the whole subgenre of Southern Gothic is worth reading at all. I hate it. It subtly, very subtly glorifies the things that it is intending to disparage. It very subtly, but very definitely glorifies the faded dream of the Confederacy, the idea of a prelapsarian South. There is no such thing as a prelapsarian South. The Southern colonists got there and immediately started brutally victimizing people. So it doesn't matter who won or lost at Gettysburg. Okay, there's no such thing as an idyllic, an Edenic South, and so much Southern Gothic seems to want to say that if we could just slow down even more with maybe an extra mint julep in the afternoon. I mean, look at all. I'm going to tell you this ugly story about this disfigured little girl, but really the backdrop is that this is a perversion of paradise. Paradise never existed, and these books, the books by this author, really bring that out. And they're also, I think, beautifully written. I don't know what to make of him in terms of his critical reception. I think people want to think of this guy as a thriller writer. There are a lot of not people, but book reviewers who aren't really people. Most book reviewers that I know, especially professional old world print media book reviewers, when you talk in conversation, not so much in print, but when you talk in conversation about this guy, they're very disparaging in a way that mystifies me, because they routinely praise hip, young Brooklyn contemporary fiction authors who don't have a tenth of his talent. So that's... okay, all right, this next one is from Harvard. This is by Nico Slate. This is Lord Cornwallis is Dead. It's a really intriguing study of India and the United States, two former British colonies, and how they've dealt with independence and how they've dealt with the challenges of a vast polyglot society in a free democracy. And I would have thought, I mean, this isn't a very long book, I would have thought that was too unwieldy a subject, but I loved this. I really did. I thought it was terrifically thought-provoking right from beginning to end. Okay, all right, we'll do 5 at a time now. This is a bit on the sad side for me, a bit on the melancholy side, but this is Harold Bloom, the legendary Harold Bloom, who tossed off a series of very short books on Shakespearean characters. This series. So Iago, Falstaff, of course, Cleopatra, Macbeth, Macbeth, there's a young Paul Scofield, Macbeth, and King Lear. And I've said a lot about Harold Bloom on this channel, and I'm sure I will say more about Harold Bloom, but when he is writing fast deadline prose, where he is not tempted to expand into profundity or bathos or both, I think he's really, really good. I love these books. Just love them. And the reason they're a little sad is because I don't think Harold Bloom is going to live out the year. And so it's going to be sad to see these things on my shelves if that happens. But these will be on my mind in September. I don't know if I've mentioned this on this channel already, but keep in mind, September is ShakeTube. And ShakeTube 2019 is very much going to happen. So these will be on my mind the whole time. It's me and Jason from Old Blues Chapter and Verse and Lukash from Totally Pretentious. We're doing ShakeTube all over again in 2019. And, of course, ShakeTube has a special significance in my heart on this channel because it was in a ShakeTube video 2 years ago that you all saw Frieda for the first time. She looked like this little hamster. She was chewing a copy of a book. She looked like a little hamster. She didn't look anything like herself now. If you go back to ShakeTube 2017, you will see the very first appearance of my little bean on camera. Back when I had no idea. I had no idea what was going to happen. I was praying that I still had one of my old dogs then, Malin Moore. I still had her. She was old, nearly blind, very, very lame. She'd lost complete control of her bladder and her bowels. Needed constant care and was very, very nervous about that fact. She was a nervous dog anyway, but she was very nervous. She knew that something fundamentally was going wrong and that she was, doing things that in her mind had a long history of would have displeased me. And I had to tell her every minute of every day, nothing you can do displeases me. Nothing at all. I would have, if you had peed on the floor or on the couch 10 years ago, I would have been displeased. But now, nothing you can do will displease me at all. And it worked sometimes to calm her down, but the last thing I thought she needed was the stress of another dog in the apartment, especially since she had been completely devoted to my other old dog, my Basset Hound Lucy. So I didn't know when I made that video. Frieda had just been here a couple of days. I didn't know how it was all going to go. Anyway, let's move on. Okay, all right. This is by Ted Floyd. This is How to Know the Birds. This is the art and science of birding, and that's all it is. It's very, very well done, very very well written, very energetic. But it's all about the basics of birding. How do you know what you're seeing? How to identify by sound? How to lay out, a map for where you're most likely to spot which species and when. Apps or aids or books or whatever that are really good for that. And I just love books like that. I just love it. So I grabbed it, of course, and kept it. Okay. All right. This is Yuri Ben Elazar. This is War Over Peace. This is the author's scathing account of Israel and Palestine. One of a handful of books that I've kept so far this year on this subject that is, it's blisteringly angry, but I loved it all the more for that reason. So, okay, this next one is Ray Locker. This is Haig's Coup, about Richard Nixon's AIDS. There you have the two of them. One is immediately identifiable as Henry Kissinger, and that is Alexander Haig. And this is an inside, day by day, minute by minute, very good, very steeply smart, especially politically astute study of Lincoln's AIDS role in his departure from the White House. See, you got the desk with a phone and a call caddy, and the phone has a wire on it. It's a totally different age. And I thought it was fascinating. Of course, I lived through that. I wrote about it while it was happening, and followed everything, every single detail. Multiple editions of daily papers to get all the news, because there was no internet. so you had to, in order to get the slightest bit of update, you had to get news everywhere. I was haunting there was a newsstand where I lived at the time, and I would go there for the morning and evening editions, and I would parse them like Holy Script. I would go through them line by line, picking out details and doing a kind of criminology map in my mind of what was going on and when and how. Never in my life, never in a million years, did I anticipate that anyway, in terms of those of you, in terms of recommending, those of you who are interested in the history of the Nixon administration, you got to have this book. You just do. I know there are a million books on the subject, but you have to have this one. Okay, this is by Michael Cater. This is Culture in Nazi Germany. A big, very detailed, very, very good book about just that, about movies and art and books. And the book parts were especially good. Everything that all the, because the Nazi propaganda program very much extended to culture. All of Hitler's cultural attachés, especially Goebbels, and knew that was really important for shaping minds. So it wasn't just the big movies that we remember now. It was everything. It was every detail of culture, high and low. And I thought the book was extra fascinating because, of course, the high mark, the thing that everyone thought of when they thought of Germany before, for instance, World War I, was its culture. Using that word in a way that we tend not to use it anymore. Before World War I, the whole world was in love with German culture. It was the pinnacle of Western culture, and then World War I happened, and then there was a possibility, because of the inconclusive end of World War I, and also because of the nature of the Kaiser himself. It was possible in some quarters in the interval after World War I to think of World War I as an aberration, as a lapse, and to go back to worshipping German culture. And then World War II happened, and not only was there a war, but there was a co-opting of culture, of German culture, and this book just handles all of that really, really well. There are large chunks of that on any book about the rise of the Nazis, but this is just about that, and really good. Okay, all right. Well, this next one is a little sad, a lot sad actually. This is Tony Horowitz's Spying on the South, about Frederick Law Olmsted, who you will know as the architect of Central Park, and his trips into the South and all the writing that he did about them. His own books on the subject are really, really good, and this book is about him and the writing of those books, and it's about the political temper of the times, and it's absolutely fascinating. And the thing that's sad is that the author suddenly and unexpectedly died. Otherwise, I would have had a chance to interview him for the Martha's Vineyard Book Festival, and it would have been my first time talking with him. But he left us the book, and the book is tremendously thought-provoking. Okay, all right, more. This is more Nixon history. I guess I'm showing my colors here. This is by Michael Bobalian. This is Battle for the Marble Palace, which is about the nomination of Abe Fortas and Earl Warren, and the battles of the Supreme Court under partially Lyndon Johnson, but mostly Richard Nixon, and the weaponizing of the court as a club and a partisan tool. And I'm a sucker for both Richard Nixon histories, micro-histories of any kind, and also anything about the Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court fascinates me. So this was a natural. I don't think I'll be getting rid of this. I think I will just make room for it on the history shelf. Okay, I won't be getting rid of this either for a completely different reason. This is by John Greenwald, and this is Inside the Black Vault. And this is a thin little book about the U.S. government hiding UFOs. and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I am an old fan of the radio talk show host Art Bell. I'm sure that a lot of you won't know that name at all. And I'm an old fan of this kind of thing. Now, as you know, I love me some conspiracy theories on this channel, and I love weird subjects like this. But to me, there's a world of difference, no pun intended, between the ongoing story of whether or not there is a Bigfoot and any idea that there are flying saucers. With Bigfoot, okay, there is a standing, obvious explanation for the wide-scale reportings of Bigfoot activity in, for instance, the American Northwest or Southwest Canada. There's a standing, perfectly good explanation for 99.9% of those eyewitness accounts, and that standing explanation is bears. There's the forests of the areas that are commonly associated with Sasquatch are thickly populated by an extremely large and extremely smelly and extremely heart-stopping, furry animal. So it stands to reason that a really good explanation for 99.9% of those sightings is that they are bears. But it isn't theoretically, intellectually impossible, to me anyway, it isn't impossible that a large species of anthropoid, as yet unknown to science, could exist in those areas. I have been through those areas, every inch of them. It's possible. It's not likely, but it's possible, I think. Whereas, with UFOs, no. With UFOs, it just has to be fun, because there isn't any possibility here, none whatsoever. Life is not, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I can tell, I've done more hopeful reading on this subject than anybody, because you won't find a bigger Star Trek fan. As far as I can tell, life is staggeringly rare in the rest of the universe. I think the number of hurdles that it has to overcome in order to become complex, multicellular at all, are astronomical, and then you just pile on miracle after miracle for them to become sentient, self-regarding, and then technological, let alone interstellar. We haven't done it. I don't think anyone else has done it. And if someone had the idea that any government would be able to keep that a secret, so with UFOs, I look at them differently than I do with something like Sasquatch. Because as far as I'm concerned, there is no chance, especially since there is a standing explanation in the room for UFOs, just like there is with Bigfoot. Only with UFOs, the standing explanation would cover 100% of the eyewitness accounts, not just 99.9%. And that is governments. Governments have black budget secret projects and test them out all the time. And that makes perfect sense to me in a way that interstellar people visiting Earth, even if you talk about their motivations, even if you leave that out, the sheer physical obstacles to such a thing are so enormous that it's not worth talking about. So I read books like this for fun, and this one was lots of fun. Okay, now we stop having fun. This is by Michael O'Hanlon. This is the Senkaku Paradox, a book I really liked, even though it infuriated me. This is about the small triggering events that can start shooting wars with huge nations. Well, this is about the way that huge nations often start shooting wars over little things that should be line item vetoes. There should be rounding errors for countries that big and that complex, especially considering that the shooting wars they start over those little things can threaten so much more than just those little things. They're almost never contained, unless you go with the fallacy of the Falklands. And I thought the thinking involved here was really good, although it was creepily militaristic. There is no such thing as kinetic defense, or any bamboozling phrase like that the author invents in this book. If it's kinetic, it's offense. Okay, there's no such thing as defending forward. If you're defending forward, you're attacking. And this book not only had a lot of Pentagon-approved military mumbo-jumbo like that, but also a lot of calls for military expenditure that can't help but please generals and that don't please people who are going to get killed. So I argued with this book, and I thought about it for a long time. I still do think about it. That's why it's on this shelf, because I think it's really thoughtful, just distasteful in a lot of ways. Okay, then we have popular science. This is the Goodness Paradox. This is by Richard Wrangham, and it's all about the evolution of human self-domestication. How did humans become civilized? Not in the sense of knives and forks or, tournaments of jousting or whatever, but how did humans stop just savagely killing each other's young, or stealing each other's brides, or that sort of thing? How did humans become civilized? And did that process lead to something we could, without any irony, call goodness? Did it lead to a genetic or a biological component for altruism? And this is one of those popular science books that you can just read and learn something on every page. I love books like that. There aren't enough of them every year for me, and this was one of them. I thought about this many, many times after I read it. Can't wait to see when the paperback comes out. I'll get to reread it. Okay, and then the last book on this shelf is something we've seen already. This is The Prior of the Orange Tree, only this is the advanced copy, which has this as the cover. Instead of this is the finished copy, and so the dragon is up top on this one, and see, and you get the whole dragon here on the advanced copy, and it's slightly different, true, but I fell in love with the book first by reading it in this form, so I just kept it. So I have 2 copies, and that's it. That is the second to last shelf here for this Annex bookcase. So the next one will be the last one. We will finish up with the Annex bookcase in our next tour. And then we face the darkest depths of Mordor. Maybe I'll lose my nerve. I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.